Chapter 1. Unexpected Prisoners. Alien Commander Ralkar leaned over his control panel, scrutinizing the report that had just appeared on his holoscreen. A routine patrol on Earth's surface had led his soldiers to capture a group of human children. Human children, he could hardly believe it. Younglings of any species were hardly worth the effort, let alone a race as supposedly primitive as humanity. Still, his superior had ordered him to assess the captives, so he had little choice but to comply. As the door to the containment chamber slid open, Ralkar's gaze narrowed, taking in the small group of young humans before him. The oldest among them, a girl with tangled brown hair and a defiant gaze, met his eyes with a silent challenge. She couldn't have been more than 12, yet something about her calm, unflinching demeanor set his nerves on edge. The others, ranging in age and appearance, clustered around her as if taking cues from her confidence. Ralkar had expected terror, panic, something that aligned with his knowledge of human behavior in distress. Instead, there was only an unnerving quiet as they stood in perfect stillness, watching him. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing harshly in the sterile chamber. "Who among you is the leader?" His voice came out with practiced authority, the weight of command honed over years of interstellar warfare. The girl stepped forward, her eyes sharp and unyielding. "I am." Her voice was steady, unwavering. Ralkar's surprise was momentary, and he quickly masked it with a stern glare. "State your designation, human." She held his gaze, a small, defiant smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Sarah," she replied, folding her arms over her chest. "And you are?" The audacity stunned him for a brief moment. No prisoner had ever dared to ask him such a question. He was an alien commander on a vessel that humanity could barely comprehend. Yet here was this child, speaking as if they were equals. "Commander Ralkar," he replied curtly, determined to keep control of the interaction. "I am here to assess the threat you and your group pose to my crew. Do you have any weapons?" Her eyes glinted with something he couldn't quite identify. "No weapons," she answered. "Unless you count our minds." A ripple of unease crept up his spine. He quickly dismissed it, rationalizing that human children were simply unpredictable, prone to strange ideas. Still, her composure was unsettling. "And what makes you think you're dangerous, Sarah?" A faint smirk appeared on her face, but she held her tongue. "Saying only, I guess you'll have to figure that out for yourself." Her calm defiance sent an unexpected chill through him. This child was no mere prisoner. There was something different about her, something that transcended the usual fear he'd come to expect from captives. His unease grew as he observed her companions, who stood in similar defiance, their faces showing no trace of the panic he had expected. Ralkar signaled to his officers, instructing them to isolate each child for individual questioning. He wanted to break their unity, to see if he could expose a crack in their collective composure. "Separate them," he ordered, his voice echoing in the chamber. 2 guards stepped forward, pulling Sarah from the group. She didn't resist, though her gaze remained fixed on Ralkar. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying a quiet certainty that echoed in his mind long after the words had faded. He forced himself to ignore the unsettling feeling her words left behind. This was an interrogation, nothing more. Yet as he watched her disappear down the corridor, he felt as though he was the one being studied. In the isolation cell, Sarah sat on a metal bench, arms folded, her gaze unwavering as Ralkar entered. He found himself oddly irritated by her calmness, by the way she sat so still, unafraid, as if she belonged there. He leaned forward, attempting to project an air of intimidation. "You seem very sure of yourself for someone in your position," he remarked coldly. She met his eyes with a level gaze. "You seem very sure of yourself for someone who doesn't understand humans," she replied, her tone polite yet pointed. Ralkar felt his irritation spike, and he struggled to maintain his composure. "Enlighten me then," he challenged, gesturing dismissively. "What exactly am I failing to understand?" She tilted her head, considering her words carefully. "Humans don't give up easily. We're not afraid of a challenge, and we don't back down just because things look hopeless." Her voice grew stronger with each word, a quiet confidence that resonated in the sterile cell. "You can isolate us, question us, but you won't break us." Her words lingered in the air, unsettling him more than he cared to admit. He had faced countless adversaries across the galaxy, but none had ever spoken with such quiet conviction. She's only a child, he reminded himself, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he was up against something far more formidable. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. And what do you think will happen if you continue to resist? Her eyes held a flicker of defiance, and for the first time, he noticed the spark of intelligence that lay behind them, an intelligence that felt older, more powerful than her years suggested. I think you'll realize that humans are more than you bargained for. Ralkar felt a strange sense of admiration, mingled with an instinctive wariness. This child, this Sarah, was not simply a prisoner. She was a symbol of something greater, a force he could not yet comprehend. And though he would never admit it, a part of him was beginning to wonder if she was right. Before he could respond, a guard appeared at the door, informing him of a disturbance among the other children. Ralkar hesitated, casting a final glance at Sarah. This is not over, he said, attempting to regain control of the situation. Sarah's gaze didn't waver. It's only just begun. Ralkar left the room with a sense of unease gnawing at him, a shadow of doubt creeping into his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had underestimated these young humans, and as he walked down the corridor, the weight of their defiance lingered, an echo he would carry with him as he prepared for what lay ahead. Chapter 1 ends with Commander Ralkar unsettled by Sarah's defiance, setting up tension and intrigue for the next chapter. Chapter 2. Seeds of Defiance. The sharp hum of the isolation cell's magnetic locks echoed as Commander Ralkar entered. He was met with the same steely gaze he'd seen in Sarah earlier, but now her expression held something different, a quiet defiance that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Sarah's composure was unnerving. How could a human child possess such strength? He was determined to uncover the root of her resilience. Sarah, he began, his voice laced with controlled authority, I've granted you more leniency than any of my other prisoners. Yet you insist on this insolence. Perhaps a harsher approach is required. Sarah's expression didn't falter. You keep calling us prisoners, she replied evenly. But you don't understand what it means to capture a human, do you? Ralkar's curiosity flared, though he kept his tone cold. Enlighten me, then. She held his gaze, her voice low but firm. Humans don't break as easily as you think. You can separate us, isolate us, but we'll find strength in places you can't touch. Ralkar scoffed, though he couldn't fully mask the unease creeping into his mind. She was only a child, yet as he looked closer, he saw something ancient in her expression, an understanding born not of age, but of deep conviction. Strength, he echoed. You're unarmed, isolated, completely at our mercy. What strength could you possibly possess? A hint of a smile tugged at Sarah's lips. The kind you'll never understand, she said quietly. Before Ralkar could respond, a beep sounded from his wrist communicator. He activated it, and a guard's tense voice came through. Commander, we have a situation in Containment Unit 3. The children are causing a disturbance. They're chanting. Ralkar frowned, momentarily caught off guard. Chanting? What tactic was this? He cast a wary glance at Sarah, who now seemed completely relaxed, as if her plan was unfolding exactly as she'd anticipated. He didn't like the feeling of being 2 steps behind. I'll be back, he muttered, stepping out of the cell. As he walked toward Containment Unit 3, he mulled over the strange unease Sarah had planted in his mind. Children, captives, acting with defiance? It was absurd. Yet somehow, the air in the ship felt heavier, as though the balance of power had shifted in ways he couldn't yet see. He arrived at the containment unit to find the group of children sitting in a circle, their voices rising and falling in unison, filling the air with an eerie resonance. The chant was soft, almost a murmur, but as Ralkar approached, he realized the words were in their native tongue, something unintelligible to him yet strangely unsettling. He raised a hand, signaling his guards to stay back. He needed to understand what was happening. Stop this nonsense, he barked, stepping into the containment area. This is no place for your Earth rituals. The children fell silent, but they remained seated, eyes fixed on him with a chilling calmness. It was as if they shared some unspoken resolve, a unity that defied his attempts to separate and conquer them. Ralkar felt his usual confidence falter under their collective gaze. One of the boys, perhaps 9 years old, looked up at him, his expression devoid of fear. "You're afraid of us," he said simply, the words more of an observation than a taunt. Ralcar bristled. "Afraid?" he scoffed, though he could hear the tension in his own voice. "What could I possibly fear from a handful of defenseless humans?" The boy exchanged a glance with Sarah, who had been watching from her cell, her eyes holding an expression of quiet satisfaction. "Because you don't understand us," the boy said. "You don't understand that humans survive by standing together." Ralcar forced a sneer. "Empty words. Unity is irrelevant without power, and you have none." Sarah's voice called from behind him, sharp and clear. "Power isn't always about weapons. Sometimes it's about refusing to yield." Ralcar turned to see her leaning casually against the doorframe of her cell, her eyes locked on him with an intensity that left him feeling exposed. Her presence seemed to amplify the defiance radiating from the others. He couldn't comprehend it. How could these children, faced with overwhelming odds, project such strength? The other children began to murmur again, this time softly, their words blending into a steady rhythmic hum. It wasn't loud, but it filled the room with an unsettling energy. Ralcar realized with a start that they were communicating something, a feeling, an idea that transcended words. He felt it in his chest, a strange, inexplicable stirring that set his instincts on edge. "Enough," he commanded, his voice sharper than he intended. "I will not allow this insubordination to continue." But even as he said it, he knew he was losing control. These children weren't cowering, weren't pleading for mercy. They were waiting for something he couldn't understand, and it infuriated him. As if sensing his frustration, Sarah spoke again. "We know you don't understand us," she said softly, almost with a hint of pity. "But that doesn't change who we are. You can isolate us, try to break our spirits, but you're only teaching us how strong we are together." Ralcar took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing himself to regain his composure. He would not let these children unsettle him further. They were human captives, nothing more. Yet as he looked at them, at Sarah, at the boy who had dared to call him out, he felt a disquieting doubt gnaw at him, a sense that he was up against something he could neither see nor control. His communicator beeped again, a quiet interruption that he welcomed with relief. It was a message from his superior, instructing him to expedite his report on the humans. With a final, tense glance at the children, he turned on his heel and strode out, leaving the guards with strict orders to keep them under tight surveillance. As the doors slid shut behind him, he exhaled, feeling a strange mixture of relief and frustration. He had assumed this mission would be straightforward, a simple matter of containment and control. But now, the certainty he had once felt was slipping, eroding with every moment he spent near these defiant young humans. In the quiet of the corridor, he paused, his mind replaying Sarah's words over and over, like an echo he couldn't escape. Asterisk, we're stronger together. Asterisk. Ralcar clenched his fists, willing the words to fade, but they clung to him, a reminder of a force he couldn't suppress. He knew that something had shifted on his ship, something intangible but powerful, and as he walked away from the containment unit, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the brink of a battle he had never anticipated, one that wouldn't be won with force alone. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Seeds of Resistance. Ralcar's mind buzzed with agitation as he made his way to the command bridge. The humans had become more than a simple nuisance. Every encounter with them seemed to chip away at the certainty he once held, that they were simply weaker beings, easily subdued. Their resilience, especially the audacity of those young captives, was unlike anything he'd encountered. He could feel something festering beneath the surface, a quiet but powerful resistance. As he entered the bridge, his lieutenant, Venkar, looked up, an expression of wary respect masking his curiosity. "Commander," he greeted, snapping to attention. "Containment reports that the prisoners remain unusually coordinated." Ralcar scowled. "Unusually coordinated? They're children, Venkar. This shouldn't be happening." Venkar hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one else could overhear. "It's not just their unity, sir. They're affecting morale. Some of our guards are unsettled by them. They're even talking about dreams, visions of the human planet's beauty and vastness, strange landscapes, and fire." Ralcar's scowl deepened. "Dreams?" He had no patience for superstition among his ranks. Yet, as much as he wanted to dismiss it, the memories of the children's unwavering stares clawed at the edges of his mind. Even in the bleak sterility of containment, they'd refused to yield. What had they called it? Unity. An unfamiliar emotion flickered in his chest, one he chose to ignore. "We'll increase surveillance and monitoring," Ralkar snapped, trying to mask his growing unease. "Let's see if their courage holds under a bit more pressure." Venkar nodded, though his face betrayed his doubts. Ralkar knew his lieutenant had once respected his strategic prowess, but the strange behaviors of the prisoners were chipping away at that confidence. Yet it wasn't just Venkar's unease that bothered him. A larger, unspoken truth lurked beneath the surface. For the first time, Ralkar found himself doubting his own authority. In the late hours of that evening, he descended into the dimly lit lower levels, making his way to Sarah's cell. He activated the screen, watching as she rose slowly from her bed, her expression as steady and unreadable as ever. He could feel her stare piercing through him, sharp as a blade. "Your resolve is impressive," he said, his voice low, laced with a dangerous edge. "But it will not last." Sarah met his gaze without a hint of fear. "That's where you're wrong, Ralkar," she replied calmly. "We don't draw strength from your kind of power. You can't make us feel fear as long as we have each other." Ralkar forced a sneer, though her words stung. "You're clinging to empty beliefs. Unity without strength is useless." Sarah's gaze softened, a hint of pity in her eyes. "That's where you don't understand us. You think strength is the ability to dominate, to control. For us, strength is in knowing we'll never be alone, no matter what you try." He stiffened, anger flaring in his chest, but his curiosity drove him forward. "Your children, separated from your families, trapped on an alien ship with no way out. Why aren't you afraid?" "Because we're human," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "We've been through worse. Our history is filled with those who survived against all odds. We stand together, no matter where we are." Ralkar clenched his fists, frustrated by her relentless calm. Her words seemed to seep under his skin, burrowing into his thoughts like a parasite. She was speaking with a conviction he had never encountered, and for a brief, uncomfortable moment, he wondered if perhaps she was right. Just then, Venkar's voice crackled through his communicator. "Commander, there's another situation." Ralkar's jaw tightened. "Another disturbance?" "I'll be there," he replied curtly, his gaze still locked on Sarah. Her expression hadn't changed, but he could see the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Leaving her cell, he stormed toward Containment Unit 3, where a growing commotion was stirring. As he entered, he saw a dozen guards standing outside the containment field, their faces pale with shock. Inside, the children were once again seated in a circle, their hands linked as they chanted, their voices steady and rhythmic, creating a strange, almost hypnotic harmony. Venkar approached, his voice low and tense. They're chanting something in their native language again. But it's affecting the guards." Ralkar stared, anger flaring in him like a flame. But beneath the anger, a chilling sense of dread crept into his mind. These children were prisoners, helpless, cut off from their home. Yet they sat together, their hands joined in silent defiance. It was as if their voices carried something more powerful than weapons, a bond that transcended their circumstances. "What are they saying?" Ralkar demanded, though he knew none of his translators would understand. The words didn't matter, not really. It was the unity behind them, the unbroken line of defiance in their faces. He stepped closer, staring down at the children. "You think this will save you?" he asked, his voice edged with scorn. "You think this unity of yours makes you invincible?" A young boy looked up at him, his eyes steady. "We don't need to be invincible," he said softly. "We just need to be together." For a moment, the air was thick with silence, each word reverberating like an echo. Ralkar felt an uncomfortable tightness in his chest. He couldn't deny the power in the room. The feeling that these children, though small and unarmed, held a strength that defied every assumption he'd made about humans. Without another word, he turned and strode out of the containment area, his mind racing. How could they be so steadfast, so utterly unmoved by the isolation and fear he had relied on to control his captives? His pulse thundered in his ears as he moved through the dim corridors, the echo of their chant lingering in his mind like a haunting melody. As he reached the bridge, he struggled to regain control, but the image of those children seated in defiance continued to gnaw at him, whispering doubts into his mind. He had expected prisoners who would break under pressure, who would yield and obey. But these children had proven to be something else entirely. Ralkar knew now that he was facing a power beyond his understanding. A strange, foreign force that neither brute strength nor intimidation could overcome. A force rooted in loyalty, courage, and a determination that even he couldn't shake. In the silence of his quarters, as he tried to push the unsettling thoughts from his mind, he was left with one undeniable truth. He had underestimated them. And for the first time in his life, Commander Ralkar felt something close to fear. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Spark of Defiance. Ralkar paced the bridge, his mind a storm of frustration and unease. He had underestimated the strength these young humans could summon from each other. No tactic, no degree of isolation or intimidation seemed to crack their spirit. Instead, their resilience seemed to only grow stronger with each passing day. He felt the power of their unity as if it had a tangible force, and it rattled him. His mind raced with questions he couldn't shake. What made these humans so defiant? Why could they resist so thoroughly? Venkar entered, his face drawn and tense. Commander, they're at it again. Chanting. The guards report it's affecting their morale. Ralkar clenched his jaw. Morale, he sneered. They're children. A few words can't bring our people to their knees. Venkar held his gaze. With respect, Commander, it's more than words. It's something deeper. Even our most hardened warriors are unsettled by it. I don't think it's just fear. Ralkar's frustration boiled over. His grip tightened on the railing, the knuckles of his fingers widening. I will speak to them myself. He descended once more to the containment level, each step a drumbeat of frustration. As he entered, he was met by the sight of the young captives seated in a tight circle, their hands interlocked, heads bowed as they chanted softly. It was an eerie, melodic sound that seemed to fill the room with an inexplicable energy. Sarah lifted her head, meeting his gaze without a trace of fear. The others stopped their chant, their silence unnerving in its precision. She rose, standing just on the other side of the containment field, calm and resolute. Ralkar narrowed his eyes, speaking with an edge that hinted at desperation. Why do you resist? What do you think you can achieve with this display? Sarah didn't flinch. We don't resist for ourselves. We resist because it's right. You may cage us, Commander, but you can't take away our choices. That's something no chain can ever bind. Ralkar felt his anger flare, but it was mixed with something he couldn't name. A discomfort that settled deep in his chest. You believe your defiance has power? You're children. Helpless. Alone in the vastness of space. Do you really think you'll make a difference? Sarah's gaze was steady, unwavering. We already have. Haven't we, Commander? Her words cut deeper than he expected. Ralkar took a step back, unnerved by the clarity in her eyes. He had always prided himself on control, on power. Yet here he was, challenged by a girl who had no weapon, no rank, only the strength of her resolve. As he stood there, momentarily speechless, one of the younger guards entered, his face pale. Commander, there's been an incident in the lower quarters. Ralkar turned, grateful for the distraction. What incident? The guard swallowed, glancing nervously at the young captives. It's the soldiers are talking. Some are saying they no longer want to guard the humans. They're asking questions, wondering why we're treating children like prisoners. Ralkar's gaze flicked back to Sarah, realization dawning on him. The children hadn't just resisted his control, they had sown a seed of dissent within his own ranks. His soldiers, his loyal force, were beginning to question him. All because of these captives. His blood ran cold. You think this will win you freedom? He asked Sarah, his voice low, dangerous. You're planting false hope. Sarah's expression softened. Hope isn't false, Commander. It's the most real thing there is. And even here, even now, you can't take that from us. For a moment, the room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Ralkar could feel the weight of her words pressing against his chest, a sensation that gnawed at the core of his beliefs. In all his years as a commander, he had never encountered a power like this, a power that lay not in strength or fear, but in something intangible, something he couldn't understand. Then a strange calm settled over him, and a thought, unbidden but undeniable, crept into his mind. What if she's right? What if they're not truly alone? Venkar's voice broke the silence, steady and loyal. Commander, we have our orders. We can't allow this to continue. It's dangerous. Ralkar's gaze drifted from Sarah to his lieutenant. For the first time, he hesitated. These captives had stirred something in his soldiers, and though he loathed to admit it, they'd stirred something in him as well. He was beginning to see them not as captives, but as beings with a strength he could not suppress. He turned to Venkar, his voice measured. Increase their isolation. Separate them, and keep all unnecessary personnel away. We can't allow this influence to spread. Sarah's calm never wavered. It won't matter. You can separate us, lock us up, but that won't stop us from being united. Ralkar's eyes narrowed. You're only making things harder for yourselves. She gave him a sad smile. Maybe, Commander, but we've learned that the harder path is usually the right one. In a final, frustrated gesture, he motioned to the guards. Move them. Separate each one to a different containment unit. Yet as they led her away, Sarah turned back, her gaze piercing him one last time. One day, Ralkar, you'll understand that strength isn't something you can force. It's something you choose. The words followed him as he returned to the bridge, ringing in his mind with a haunting clarity. He tried to shake it off, focusing on orders, strategies, anything to quiet the unease gnawing at him. But her voice echoed relentlessly, planting seeds of doubt within him that even he couldn't control. In the days that followed, reports trickled in from his lieutenants, detailing rising unease among the ranks. Some of his soldiers, hardened and loyal, had begun to falter, questioning the mission's purpose. The seeds Sarah had planted were taking root, spreading through his ship like wildfire, and though he tried to drown it in protocol and discipline, he couldn't extinguish the gnawing certainty that she'd been right. She had shown him a strength beyond fear, a unity he could not break. And as Ralkar looked out across the vastness of space, he felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping into his heart, one he had spent his entire life rejecting. Hope. End of Chapter 4.